Welcome to DisNewsYouKNow Podcast. My name's Marl. I'm naming this time capsule. This is what DisNewsYouKNow UK. It's what the stories giving their opinion. As many of us already know, disabled people news affects our lives. It's very rarely represented in the media. So then this podcast is no effort to try and address that. I know your first story comes from Speak to News Service, and the headline is UN calls for human rights assessment for government's benefit cuts bill and mental health reforms. Disabled experts from the United Nations have told the UK government to carry out a comprehensive assessment for the human rights impact of its universal credit cuts bill, further plans to reform disability benefits and its mental health reforms. The UN's Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, CRPD, had previously raised concerns about the impact on disabled people of the Universal Credit Act, the mental health bill, and further reforms laid out in March's Pathways to Work theme paper. He wrote to the government after being alerted to the implications of its plans by DPL Forum England and the user-aid rights-based organisation Liberation. But after assessing the government's response and evidence provided by disabled people's organisations, the committee has called on the UK Government Act. It says it should assess the impact of its reforms and ensure in close consultation with disabled people that its future plans do not cause any further retrogression in their rights following years of attacks by successive governments. I'm paraphrasing the article there. The UN Committee calls for a comprehensive human rights assessment of both the Universal Credit Act and Pathways to Work, before implementing the cuts and reforms to disability benefits expected in the autumn's white paper, and it calls on work and pensions ministers to take measures to eliminate and reduce negative aspects of the Universal Credit Act on disabled people and to carry out full assessment of its impact. After its measures have been implemented, it should then, again in close consultation with disabled people, set out a plan to mitigate the impact of the Act to ensure disabled people have access to support they need to fulfill their rights to live independently, be included in the community, time work and have an adequate standard of living. And it says the government plan to prescribe the work capability assessment must be designed and implemented with the close consultation and active involvement of disabled people, and that they should not lead any further assault on disabled people's rights. It calls for action to ensure, after months of concerns about Labour's plans to force banks to carry out mass surveillance on claimants through the already in public authority Ford-era McCovey bill, currently approaching its final parliamentary stages, that those banks are not able to access claimants' personal private information. The committee also calls for comprehensive human rights assessment of the government's mental health bill, which has been approved by the House of Lords and which is the first report stage in the Commons on the 14th of October, to ensure it fully aligned with the UN Conventions of Rights of Persons with a Disability. And it says the government should improve its procedures for measuring the impact of new laws on the rights of disabled people. Big Burgess, co-chair of the DPL Forum England, said we are grateful to the UN for recommending the UK government make full rights assessment for the impact of social security policies, its strict mitigations to protect us from further harm, protect us from bank spying, and remind the government they should be consulting close with disabled people and their organisations. It illustrates again that the UK government remains hostile to disabled people, and if its treaty and legal obligations will not relent in defending their rights and lives. Dorothy Gould, Liberation's founder, said she was absolutely delighted at the committee's response cuts through the government's attempts to justify its mental health bill, and she praised its vital intervention and refutation of the government's stance. The article goes on, but that's the main key points of it, which is there. And yeah, the UN, it's again, of voice their concerns, but they voiced their concerns originally before the welfare bill went through, and then they voiced their concerns about the time bill, and they voiced their concerns about the cuts by Tory governments and the cuts during the coalition governments, and seems to be a key theme here, and that governments seem to be able to totally ignore any concerns of the UN bring, and even though they cite Human Rights Association, which we fully signed up to. And again, there's been no follow-up to those concerns when the government then implements legislation that does exactly the things that they fear the UN inspectors potentially feel are going to happen. So, again, I wonder how much power that they see. I said it in previous episodes, I think I've said it in the episodes now, but you wonder what kind of power the UN actually has to impose in these issues, because let's be clear, these cuts are going to go through. The mental health bill looks like it's going to go through. It's just a dime bill. It's like it will go through. And I wonder whether the safeguardings that people are looking for will be added to that. I really doubt it will be that change when it actually goes through. So what it actually is now, despite some concerns being based in the House of Lords, and we discussed that in the last episode, one of the key dissenters being Theresa May in terms of being against the bill, but ironically enough, other things that she's concerned about in terms of the rights and the dignity of disabled people, she didn't seem to be awfully concerned. During a period as Prime Minister before that as a government minister, Secretary of State. So, and can't say I'm that I'll favour the voting record, but I'm pretty certain she would vote against any of the cuts to welfare then. So, just disconcern me that we signed to these treaties and how much power they really have, and if, all the things going on across the globe. Don't mind me saying a reference, but people know what I'm talking about, and you wonder how much the power the UN actually has of how much notice previous governments talked about, and in fact even the opposition party talk about, I need to come out of the Convention of Human Rights. So, I think possibly even the former. I think we should come out to the Convention of Human Rights. So if that then moves forward in the next parliament, that's something that they put in their manifesto, or when the parties put in manifesto, could put right to that, and gives these voices from the UN even less credibility. Really. And also, I'll go back to the first episode where one of the stories was about, one early episodes with the episode was about, around about the time when there was a lot of dissenting voices around the welfare reform bill, and a lot of these organisations that are now saying that, they're glad that the UN saying that they need to be involved in a consultation around these legislative ideas, which I fully agree with, but the narrative then was that these very organisations were saying that they weren't going to play ball and they weren't going to come to the table, and I did say that at the time in my analysis that however much I understood the reasons for them stepping back is that it's actually not counterproductive, because, someone has to be at that table, and actually if you're talking about lawfulness, etc. and so forth, well, one the law is about the duty to consult, isn't it? So if there's no one to consult, you look a bit if critical if we step away from the table, even though I know why they're stepping away from the table, and I think that it's almost could be looked at as a devil's pact by some people that inside the movement that will say, well, why are you consulting with the government that wouldn't bring in these cuts? Well, someone's got to sort of them, and have some representative, and that's, the price that you pay is that regardless, you almost in a bind where you can't win for these organisations, but they, if you're stepping away months ago, you can't then argue that, when the UN say there should be more consultation, there should be when you've openly stepped away. So I think, did keep an open mind, there's always going to be voices within the movement that will argue or be suspicious of certain DPOs that are close to and governments, so that in terms of the hastening about legislation. But the fact of the matter is you've got to have a seat at the table, however much that, whether that seat has any influence or has as much power as we want it to have is a different matter. We know that the government will do what it wants to ultimately, and also the societal narrative, etc., and so forth. And it can paint it however way it wants, but that's just part of modern democracy at the end of the day. And as liberals and any democracy will be, and I'm not saying this is impossible, but look all the ways in the world it is. But the reality is power is power, and power doesn't have to concede power, and power doesn't have to concede influence. It doesn't have to cede to other ideas. So we will always get a situation where even if you get some of your ideas across, whatever comes out at the end of it in terms of legislation will never be what you want it to be. You'll never get all the rights. You'll never get all, everything, all your demands met. It's just not the way that, lobbying and work with power works, unless you've got good significant power, which certain lobbyists and certain organisations and businesses exert through all the means through lobbies and stuff. For us, as grassroots organisations, that's not the case. It's not going to ever be the case. So, just got, I don't seat at the table is better than no seat at the table, and it's another thing I'll sprint. And that's hardly ableist politics there, but it's co-cluster and whatever. But but again, in relation to this, I think I don't think government will really listen too much to the outcomes of this report, because I think seemingly listen to any of the others, even though Mr. Disabled People does say he wants to consult. And it's one thing consulting, there's a thing taking those rules on board, and quite another creating legislations practicable and actually quite to a meaningful white-space approach to disabled people. And that's the end goal, and I think we're a long way from that. Also to influence that, they got to have some voice. So I think, hopefully certain DPOs will come to the table and will be even engaging, hopefully meaningful discussion with the government moving forward. Another thing we have, of course, is the government moving parts surround this current government, and depending on what news sources you listen to and how much you believe, Labour government is potentially in crisis, and not a day goes by without people talking about shenanigans and moves being made against those in power, Islamic State, etc. and so forth. I personally don't think it's going anywhere, but you read the news headlines, there's talks of moves being made against him, and if there was a legislative challenge, and who knows how that affects the future of some of these legislative changes that are in the pipeline. It doesn't change the welfare reform that's happening. The one change is the suicide bill, or the other changes that are down the line in terms of welfare changes. Maybe if there's a more left-leaning lane that comes into power, which I can't say, but there's talk of mills around potential other candidates, or even who comes in as deputy, whether that kind of softens their stance towards some of the list of changes that affect particularly disabled people. I don't really see aim for, but that's something to keep an eye on as well. The next brief, and let's do summary, and it's from What Car. And it says disabled drives in EV charging. Research from What Car highlights that disabled drivers are at risk of being left behind due to inaccessible electric vehicle charging infrastructure, lack of accessible charger points, pose a significant barrier to adopting the EVs. And there's not many thought about this, but it makes perfect sense. And another heavy aspect that's been thought about. We talk about the move to greenness, etc., and so forth. And so far, all those strategies involved modes of transport, rights of access and that transport by inaccessible to disabled people. You look at rail transport, we've had many conversation about how accessible rail travel is, whether it's having to book early and then struggling to get on and then struggling to get off. We've talked about how many bothered disabled people end up having to crawl off rail transport. And talk about bus transport. There was only a few episodes ago whereby there was that news story of the gentleman that sued the bus company. I think there was two stories of some of the sued bus companies. So, and now we're looking at the climate change and move forward towards green technology and cars, etc., and so forth. Inaccessible charge points. And we've seen no real plan in terms of rolling out of this technology that involves how disabled people would access those cars. Of course, I suppose they don't. When you look at the whole welfare bill agenda, again, there was a story prior, I think it was a couple of episodes ago, about criticism of the mobility scheme and talk of it being too expensive, etc., and so forth. So maybe the argument there is, well, if you take the mobility scheme away from disabled people, then you wouldn't have to upgrade it, include electric cars, etc., and so forth. And maybe let's say argument they shouldn't have access to it, which probably would be for some politicians given the overall climate on disabled people's needs and welfare change, etc. But, something that, disabled people in that top agenda in terms of climate change as well. And in terms of the overall effects of it, you can argue disabled people are probably the most significant, not significant, they're the most risk group from climate change. Number of factors, the reason accessibility being one of them, and the ability to show themselves from the effects of that. So I think, again, with, all this talk of consultation with disabled people, such as welfare benefits in terms of progression and talk about the need for disabled people to get into work, etc. and so forth. Young trees as part of society and trees as, equal members, because again, in terms of climate change at the moment, with, our needs within that process in terms of accessing green technologies is has been forgotten. So that's something that needs to be put flat on the agenda, and it's what Carver highlighted that in terms of green technology, in terms of budgeting. And that story comes from the Spitty News Service, and the headline is Disabled People of Colour speak of their having safety fears after mass far-right protests. Disabled people of colour say last spring's horrific far-right protests in London has left them feeling terrified and unsafe. But says process. In political says protest was supposedly aimed at free speech, but most of those who attended appeared to be there to complain about immigration, while the event was awash with racist conspiracy theories and anti-Muslim hate speech. The event saw more than 110,000 nationalist protesters, mostly white, marching to the centre of the capital, and many of those who took part were white disabled people. According to the article, one disabled woman of colour who was in central London has had to say, told DNS that the protesters had left her feeling scared and terrorised and concerned that it marked a real turning point in the threat caused by the far right to people of colour. She said, protest was about race and immigration, Muslims, religion, culture, about making Britain white again and starting a race war. The chief executive of Disabled People's Organisation, who lives in London, told DNS That's seen the images it left her the most scared she'd been since she insisted were chased down the street by racist children 45 years ago. Disabled writer and artist and filmmaker Dolly Sen, a Londoner living in Norwich, said the seeing pictures of the far-right protests in the capital was terrifying. She told DNS, "I was not there, but I could feel the viciousness and hatred from here. I'm brown, my mum is white, my dad Indian, have experienced racial violence in the 70s and 80s, and it feels like I've gone back in time, when my heart was always shaking, waiting for the next attack, hoping it would be only verbal and not physical. I feel like I'm back to those times, as if time hasn't moved on. I'm hyper-vigilant most of the time, but I'm also angry. Will my life ever be where I am not fighting for the right to survival, or the right to be?" She added, "I feel the coldness of the world at the moment. I feel vulnerable and very lonely whenever I venture out to the door. And if I wasn't the age I am, with the life and activist experience, it had the potential to push me into deeper mental distress or suicide. What really makes my heart heavy is that some disabled people are racist, are on that side, and will never be gone for them too. They don't seem to see what oppression is intellectual." She remembers being shot at in the summer of 2005 outside a pub in Peckham in a homophobic crime because she was holding a woman's hand. She said, "That was terrified and felt powerless and hid away. Now I am terrified, but I won't hide anymore. I will stand up to it. I just hope people will stand with me." Rebecca, and there's asterisks says in Latino style her name, who's in central London Saturday, said she believed the process could be a really turning point and not being a new phase where we need to need to really stop and sit down and reconsider how we deal with this threat. She said it was obvious the far right was very well organised and funded to the point where they can quickly and efficiently organise more than 100,000 people to descend on our homes and terrorise, frighten us, show, slip and posters or physical attackers and declare it a victory. They're doing it through force and violence that obviously extremely will be in favour group to the far right has designs for. I was watching these people walking down the street on Saturday and they're holding their flags in the same way that you would hold a ceremonial rifle. The butts in the palm of their hands, resting the barrel on your shoulder and wearing camouflage and walking down the street expecting everybody to part for them. So they were army and they're taking over for the day. And the listener, a friend and member of Sisters of Freedom and of Disabled People Against Cuts and another London resident, said, "As a disabled person of colour, I find what happened on the weekend scary. As an immigrant to the person of colour, I'm very aware of what we face as a community. I recently did a podcast with a Filipino friend and we talked about the attacks on Filipino nurses who work in the NHS. As an Eastern and Southeast Asian, we are still targeted and as stable people we're seeing scroungers. Government's rhetoric does not help. I'm scared. Stable people of course spoke to DNS this week have called for society among all the communities who face rising waves of hate towards them and say they are convinced it's time to speak up and fight back to counter the current waves of violence and hate-filled rhetoric." So now, Chief Executive Relations People said the weekend's events had left her really scared and not quite sure who's going to turn out. I won't read any more if you've kept the gist. These are really within time and, no doubt there were unholy some disabled people at that march. Obviously I wasn't there. But, it stands to reason that, right, we don't want much in this group, they all think the same, believe the same. There could be some people that do believe in some of these rhetoric, and just like there's some people that disabled people that have been internalized ableism. There's going to be some sad people hold racist views and some sad people hold homophobic views, etc. and so forth. And there's going to be some people that believe, disabled people are scroungers, etc. and so forth. Some people, we not want big happy family And it is worrying. It's worrying that it's continuation from last summer and the scenes we saw last summer. And obviously, the same forces driving a lot of this. And some of it is just people in misplaced anger that are looking for other people to blame for the fact that the country has a lot of challenges, and unfortunately, in a lot of times like this, seems to go by the way of racism. It seems to be there, and immigrants and people of colour seem to be those to blame. But also, ironically enough, disabled people also seem to always be targeted at times of economic extreme. We saw all of this 14 years ago, plus 15, 16 years ago, when we saw the economic crashes all around the world. This was the same rhetoric that was being peddled then, and it seems like same as the 80s and the 70s. When things go really, really bad, what seems to be the key social economic factor is that deprivation. That's not saying that there's no racism any other time. Fortunately, racism didn't take a day off, but it seems to be increasing in terms of the vocalism of it. There's been far more overt at times like this, which is sad and scary, and hope that people can unite and, action can be taken to safeguard, particularly, all communities, but particularly needs to be shielded and protected. But unfortunately, they are going to be. And this is the last we've seen of this. And especially as a lot of this sentiment is led by political discourse by some in mainstream parties and some emerging parties. Just hope that sense of vowels and those on the other side, kind of particularly political parties, I think they really need to step up now and quell some of this emerging anger before things get out of hand, which I personally thought they were going to last summer. Fortunately, they didn't get. But there were still terrible scenes. But don't know. The problem is, as I've said in previous episodes, political class doesn't have new political answers to problems, until those political answers are found and change happens in some way that rebuilds the country, supports rebuilds the working class, supports them, and finding employment, and healthcare system is reviewed and rebuilt, and the social care system is fixed. It's all those things happen, then you're going to get the anger isn't going anywhere, and it's going to be misdirected, and it will be fault of, for many people, fault of immigration, fault of those less well off, which is counterintuitive really, because those if just as level as you, or even less than you, can't really be the problem. But hatred doesn't say that. And unfortunately, political class has failed all of us, as I've said, on numerous occasions and episodes, and still being done using 40-year-old strategies to solve modern problems, which just isn't going to happen. And that's left or right. And that's even if certain political factions want to solve that problems because people have agendas and political parties have agendas, and you wonder whether some of those agendas are aligned with the re-emergence of a prosperous working class. Unfortunately, there's a massive inequality gap, and that doesn't seem to be decreasing anytime soon. In fact, it's getting even worse, and doesn't really seem to be, despite some moments, the appetite to address that in a meaningful way, other than to what appears to be for me, well, just my opinion, but to be those that are, to blame those for their own, that are losing out for their own demise, really. Talked on the last episode about, a lot of the stigma that not just disabled people, young people are facing about, the lack of employment and being on the benefits bill, etc. and so forth, mental health wise. Well, look what's happened in the last 14 years and how their lives have been affected. You just see pandemic alone and how that affected young people. Significant, and yet we're blaming them for the effects of that, okay? The disaster that is the housing market for those who aren't affluent to access the property ladder, to even afford rent, rising rents. The employment sector had a complete mess, the gig economy, fact, higher educations, their prices extortionate. There's nothing for young people, and then we blame young people unless they've got, rich families, affluent families, and even then we talk about the squeeze middle. And I'd argue it's the solely eradicating the middle. Middle class some have a low look the same as they were perhaps 30 years ago. So unless we have a political class that solves those problems, fortunately, I think we are always going to peddle the rhetoric that they're peddling, and I just hope that governments and all the political parties take note and start to really look again at legislation to protect people from the effects of poisonous rhetoric, because otherwise I think we will end up headed in a really dangerous direction. I also want to say that although I've gone into some of the issues, I think maybe behind some of those views of some of the people that attend these marches, I'm not condoning the hatred. I don't agree with the opposite. Not. But I think we do kind of, particularly in the grassroots of ordinary people that join these marches, kind of get behind the surface and some of the reasons why they fall. I don't know, agree with a lot, the things that are reasons that are given, because I think it masks all those issues. There's plenty of issues that are there, but I think until you kind of try and peel back the layers and get behind some of the rhetoric, you're never going to address it. Find a solution to address it. Now, also think that, solution to racism is not to be racist. I don't think, although people have argue viewpoints as to why they feel the way they feel, I think in the day, condemning someone just because of whatever background, whether, I think it's just plain wrong. I think it's ignorant to say. But there are the people that are easily played into these movements, have legit concerns about their life, but perhaps threaten their angry towards different groups and blame them for things that, in my personal opinion, aren't their fault. I think this is social structure and, I think a lot of these claims are misplaced on whatever part. But even that aside, I don't think this level of hatred and the violence that we're seeing, etc. and so forth, is ever justified. Particularly for a group or groups of people who are, but then this is I don't stand in the same boat as you very often. You're in the same boat, everybody is struggling, and, the benefits thing where people say, people, benefits, etc. and so forth. I've never met a millionaire who's on benefits. It doesn't exist, In the day, they might get a certain level of benefits, but, there's still even the municipality, because that's what benefits should get to. You hear stories of so-and-so living in this property and that property and blah, 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 and, council tax benefits paying for it, and they contribute this, that, or whatever, the tabloid stories. But, I refuse to believe that there's people living their life poorly on benefits. Because simply the system doesn't, just won't sustain that. So, maybe I'm naive, but I just think a lot of this blaming other people for all circumstances, to me, it's the political class that need to find the answers to these solutions, and hating your neighbour. And if I be your neighbour and you're not living an affluent life, suggests that they also aren't living an affluent life, otherwise they wouldn't be living in the same environment that's deprived that you are. It doesn't make sense to me. So, so it's again, I oppose, as to wasn't trying to apologise for. Anybody that else has kind of views, who's trying to kind of give some kind of reasons as to why certain people make a drawing to those movements and feel as if they have to go on those marches. But I don't condone any of the violence or hatred or rhetoric that's directed towards people of colour or disabled people, encouraged to the political class, because they're the ones that bring us order of themselves. So, yeah, I just wanted to cut it up. But anyway, thanks for listening. See you next time.